Tracy's the director of Rangeland Conservation with the California Cattlemen's Association. Tim Koopman owns and runs the Koopman Ranch, and Pelayo Alvarez is the Conservation Program Director for the Defenders of Wildlife. And you guys are just all buddies.
We are.
Awesome.
We're gonna do it.
Please do it. Do it. Yeah. Don't let me hand this and get out of the way.
Perfect.
Okay.
You get to say. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this picture? And no, for the cattle producers, it's not the Hereford cow, because my family raises those. So there's something else wrong with the picture. What's wrong with this picture? It's all the houses in the background and this picture really is illustrative of what brought our partnership together, and similar to the one sitting on your table that's on the front cover of Grazing for Change. It's the current development and the potential development that you see driving throughout our state, the for sale signs and the new subdivisions that are coming in. In our presentation, in a short amount of time, we're going to go through how our partnership was forged, the research that brought us together, which is the foundation for our partnership, and also what our common goals are and projects are that we've been working on. So going back about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, the cattlemen were having regular meetings with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And the gist of those meetings were ranchers, the officers of the California Cattlemen's Association, were telling the director at that time, Steve Thompson, that every single rule and regulation that they were doing and the practices that they were forcing down on ranches were driving ranchers off the land and putting them out of business. At that same time, the environmental community, during their quarterly meetings with Steve Thompson, were complaining that the Fish and Wildlife Service wasn't doing enough for species in the state, weren't protecting habitat, and weren't adding to species numbers in the state. So Steve Thompson challenged the environmental community to come back with what their #1 concern was. And he thought that that would never happen. He thought, well, this is great. I've got them off my back. They'll never agree. But needless to say, they came back at their next quarterly meeting and told Steve that their biggest concern were the grasslands in California. And his response was, well, then you need to work with the ranchers that have owned that land for generations and are stewarding it and that have the habitat that you're concerned about. And that really laid the foundation for the ranching community and the environmental community to come together over 5 years ago on Tim's ranch to begin the discussions of our partnership. And when we got together that day, there was a common understanding of the development concerns, but also the research that brought us all to that table that Pelayo is going to talk about.
So as Tracy mentioned, well, first of all, my name is Pelayo Alvarez. I work for Defenders of Wildlife as director of the Rangeland Coalition. So both Tracy and I co-direct the coalition together. And my goal today is to explain why the environmental community, why Defenders of Wildlife is part of this coalition and is actually actively engaged and in a leadership role. Our concern for the environmental community is the loss of the California grasslands, and the realization that they actually provide habitat for 90% of the threatened and endangered species in California. And the realization that they're privately owned. 85% of the grasslands in the Central Valley are privately owned. So it made sense to start working with the ranching community. So as Tracy mentioned, we're losing a lot of rangelands. We lose them to more intensive agriculture. We lose them to urban development. And we're starting to lose them to renewable energy. It depends on who you ask. We lose between 30,000 and 60,000 acres of rangelands in California every year. And it's not only the loss of acreage, but the fragmentation of those landscapes that is having an impact on species and a lot of ecological processes. So what I think really brought the environmental community to this coalition and to start talking to the ranching community and to the government agencies is research, is the science the realization that, that this habitat is being provided by private ranches, that they're good stewards of the land. For instance, the Central Valley grasslands are good wintering habitat for raptors. And they provide habitat for invertebrate species like the bay checkerspot butterfly. So if you look at the picture, on your right, on my left, on your right, the right side of the fence, that's what happens when you don't graze our California grasslands. You don't see a whole lot of biodiversity. You see exotic annual grasses taking over the site. On the other side of the fence, the yellow part, you get a lot of biodiversity when you graze our annual grasslands. This butterfly, the caterpillar of this butterfly feeds on a particular plant. It's called Plantago erecta. If you don't graze, the exotic species take over, and they don't let that plant to thrive. When you graze, there's a lot of biodiversity. There's an open canopy. That plant can thrive, and the butterfly can reproduce. As we encroach on these rangelands, the species move to the remnants of open spaces, of wild spaces that are provided by private ranches, like the red-legged frog. This species is on the endangered species list, and now in the San Francisco Bay Area, 50% of the habitat for red-legged frog is provided by stock ponds. The tiger salamander, that's another species on the endangered species list that has habitat also in stock ponds and vernal pools, a habitat that I'm going to be talking about. Tim will probably mention that too. And I think the vernal pools, this is a very, very iconic habitat, very unique to our California grasslands. What happens is there's a hard pan underneath the soil that allows the pools to create when the rains come. The pools fill up, so they spend about half of the year full of water. Then when the rains stop, they slowly start drying, and then that creates a lot of endemic species, because these conditions are not are very extreme conditions, going from flooding to drought, and only a few endemic species can withstand these conditions. The issue with the vernal pools is that grazing is the best tool that we have to manage these vernal pools. When you don't graze, you get the same picture as with the bay checkerspot butterfly. The annual species take over, and you don't see any of the wildflowers. Another issue why grazing is a good tool to manage these vernal pools is that it reduces evapotranspiration, and it allows the pools to remain with water for a long time, allowing a lot of invertebrates to complete their life cycle. I think this was, the vernal pool issue was what really brought the community together, and the understanding that the research was providing a safe or a common language for us to come together. As Sarah mentioned, ranchers are important in our watersheds. In California, about 85% of our surface water flows through private rangelands. So what they do, their practices on the land impact the water quantity and the quality that we get. There's land management agencies and water utilities in California that only manage their land through grazing. Fires is no longer an option, and so grazing is the only way we can manage these lands for watershed function. And our rangelands in California are also really well positioned to help us mitigate climate change. We can sequester carbon in the grasses, in the shrubs, and in the trees. And they're also providing a lot of connectivity that could mitigate climate change. So when the species are going to try to migrate to northern and higher elevations, these private rangelands are providing a lot of open space so these species can migrate. So mitigation of climate change is an important issue too. Not only the research, I think, brought the environmental community to this coalition, but sometimes the research is not enough. It's important that people see the good stewardship of private ranchers in California and other parts of the United States. This is Steve Sinton's ranch in the central coast of California. A lot of people drive just to see this display of wildflowers. The wildflowers are there because of the grazing, because of the good stewardship and the management of the land that these private ranches are doing.
So our partnership has over 100 organizations that have voluntarily decided to work together. It was no lawsuit, no piece of legislation that told us that we had to come together. It was the research that brought the environmentalists to the table, and the cattlemen's were brought to the table by a number of people in leadership positions, including one who is now an officer with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, who challenged me personally to find a way to work with the environmental community when I was hired on at Cattlemen's 6 years ago. So I'm pretty sure this is the only place that you'll ever see Farm Bureau and Defenders and Cattlemen ever on the same slideshow. This resolution is the foundation for our partnership, and in the booklet that's on the tables on page 30, you can see this in more detail. But just some of the highlights is that it's completely voluntary. We focus on the stewardship that ranchers provide. In California, there's a lot of land that has been acquired by public agencies. Some of it's mismanaged, and that's a concern from the ranching community, and now the realization of the environmental community is that these good grasslands in California could not be all bought up and managed by the state or federal agencies. That it's collaborative, it's locally led, it's not people out of Washington, D.C. telling us that we need to work together. It's looking at finding technical assistance for ranchers to help them be better stewards, looking at enhancement, preservation, whether that be conservation easements, mitigation easements, and additional incentives to keep ranchers on the ground, and not forgetting the economics to keep them in business. And just to highlight under all of these categories, I'll give you one example. The first one of our big parts is outreach and education, and that's what the booklet is in front of you. It features ranchers, 10 stories of what they're doing on the ground, and that's been a big part of our partnership, is sharing the story of what's happening on the ground, what ranchers are doing for natural resources in our state. Under the research side, we've done everything from put together the research that Pelayo mentioned and more, but also working on new research projects, whether it be on social issues, getting researchers access to land, or even policies that impact the way ranchers manage or could manage their land. Based on one of them specifically in California was a tax incentive for ranchers who agree to keep their land in ranching, and the government, our state, has cut that program, and the results show out of a survey of 750 ranchers that over half of them without that tax break would not be economically viable operations. And that just leads you to conversion of the grasslands to other uses, whether that be chopped up for subdivisions or intensive ag. On the project side, we've worked with a lot of our partners to get funding for conservation easements or put ranchers in contact with programs or individuals that can help them enhance their landscape so that it not only benefits their ranching operation, but also the natural resources on that ranch. And a big focus of our partnership has been on the legislative side. We found that there's a number of policies that we agree on, whether it be on the Williamson Act, that program that I just mentioned that was a state tax incentive for ranchers who keep their land in ag, or the estate tax, or the Farm Bill. And this is actually a picture that's very representative of our coalition. We have cowboy hats in front of the Defenders of Wildlife after one of our lobbying trips to Washington, D.C. So our partnership's motto is that we agree on 95% of the issues and we don't let the other 5% of the issues take up 100% of our time. We know that there's things that we don't agree on, but we could go back to that outreach, the research, the policies that we do agree on, and make changes in those areas instead of trying to find common ground where there isn't common ground. And Pelayo and I do have colleagues that are on different sides of the table on a lot of issues, but we've also opened up the doors for communications where we have been able to find common ground, where we have been on different sides of the issues, or to work on policies to make them more friendly to ranchers so that they can live with them and not be pushed out of business, and sharing those ranching stories with the other side. Matt?